The Golden Mango Tree by Karen Lee, illustrated by Tochiko. As May cut into the ripe golden mango, she was reminded of a journey from a long time ago. The sticky juice dripped from her fingers, and she remembered being crammed in the back of the car with her brother and sister as they returned from her auntie's house. May licked the sweet juice from her fingers and felt it run down her chin, taking her to another time and place filled with a whole host of flavors, sounds, and emotions. Stays at May's auntie's house were filled with delicious banquets of steamed fish, succulent lobsters, and exotic dumplings, as the whole family feasted around the huge table in the kitchen. The air would be filled with the comforting smells of ginger and garlic. The table splattered with dark splashes of soy sauce, and meals would last for hours as the mountain of food slowly diminished. The adults picked at the food with their chopsticks and deposited mussels on the plates of the little ones' chubby fingers. Reached out for juicy lobsters, claws, and rice balls were replenished several times over. Late at night, May would lie in bed in her cousin's room and hear her dad and her auntie chatting away in Chinese downstairs, the strange language filling the air as they relived their childhood and put the world to rights. Opportunities to spend time together were rare, and so they all enjoyed every moment. It was one day on the long drive home from such a visit that May first heard the story that she held so dear. Mum was driving the car and Dad was dozing beside her. The children in the back were tired but not ready for sleep and were becoming fractious and unsettled. At that point, Dad, stirred and feeling nostalgic from the time spent with his sister, began to tell them the story of the golden mango tree. Many years ago, the family had lived in a tiny fishing village right on the edge of China. In those days, the men of the family worked hard in the fields or on the tiny fishing boats, whilst the women looked after their many children. Times were hard, for there was rarely enough money, but the days were long and sunny. Laughter filled the streets. Then came the war and the mood changed as families lost their sons, their workforce and their optimism. The houses became run down as there was no money to maintain them. The land which once had yielded plenty of food became barren and desolate. Even the fishing boats stopped leaving the harbour. As time went on, things began to improve and the village came back to life as the families were reunited. The village elders gathered to restore order, and Grandfather was told that he must tidy up his house and garden. In particular, he was told to get rid of the ugly gnarled tree that stood outside his door. This tree rarely bore leaves, let alone flowers or fruit, but had stood guard at the door for as long as anyone could remember. Grandfather refused to destroy it and promised that he would improve the situation in other ways. From that day on, he cared for that tree as if it were a child. He watered it, he sang to it, he told it the stories of his ancestors and his hopes for his children. Each morning he would sit in his doorway and watch the world go by, waving to the passing villagers as they set off to work. In the evening, as the sun set, he would bring his cup of steaming tea out to the little stool that he set up in the doorway, and he would sit there listening to the crickets sing as the sun dropped out of the sky. The strangest thing happened one spring fall when all around the leaves were unfurling. The little tree outside the house developed leaves too. As the days lengthened, the tree flourished and soon it had grown big and strong. The whole village marveled as Grandfather continued to tend to his garden in the shade of his remarkable tree. One day, Grandfather noticed that the tree was bearing fruit. Beautiful golden mangoes that ripened in the sun. The tree was laden with them, and all the villagers came to see and to taste. The family set up a table outside the house to sell the fruit. Word spread fast of these amazingly juicy sweet treats. Grandfather now moved his little stool to beside the table and proudly sold his produce to his neighbors and his friends. By the next year, the family were more prepared for their harvest, and Grandfather would take the mangoes to the market each morning. He would return later that day with pockets full of coins, which he tipped into a jar in the kitchen. The jar continued to fill as the years went on, and not one single coin was spent or taken from that jar. Grandfather would often stand and stare up at his treasure with a distant, dreamy look on his face, before turning away and heading outside to tend to his tree. It was only after much time had passed that Grandfather took the jar down from the shelf and passed it to his son with the words, "This is your golden mango. Go plant your tree wherever you wish. Set down roots of your own." And that is what his son did. He travelled to the other side of the world with that golden mango, to a land that was different and overwhelming. He worked in kitchens and restaurants, where little was familiar apart from the clattering Chinese voices of earlier settlers, and he began to save coins in his own jar. Long days in hot kitchens taught him a new way of living, producing the traditional meals of his homeland and some less familiar dishes which catered to the tastes of his new countrymen. At night he lay alone in a cold, narrow bed, dreaming of his father and the wife that he had left behind in a small village in China. When he woke, he knew that the next day would be exactly the same as the one that came before. Things improved, and one day the jar was full enough for his wife to come and join him in his new country. Together they watched their pile of coins grow, and eventually they had enough saved to open their own restaurant. Days were filled with cooking and eating, laughing and loving, strangers in land where the incredible flavors that they brought with them were still treated with suspicion. However, as time passed, the family were accepted and welcomed by their neighbors. Their accents and their habits changed. The children made new friends at school, and years later, those children went forth into the world to put down roots of their own. As one of those children, they wondered if there had ever been a golden mango tree or even a jar of coins. But what were golden were? Those memories of her childhood and the time that went before. Since that day in the car long ago, each time the knife broke through the skin of her favorite fruit, she was transported back to days filled with tasty food, Chinese voices and laughter. They knew that for her the mangoes would always be golden.